"Grandpa, please help him." The little boy's voice was a thin, terrified thread in the fabric of the afternoon park. It wasn't directed at his own grandfather. It was a desperate plea aimed at the only island of stillness in a sudden storm of violence, an old man sitting on a bench, watching the chaos unfold with an unnerving calm. His name was Samuel Hayes, and the worn tweed jacket he wore did little to protect him from the autumn chill or from the ugliness erupting just a few feet away. For young men, all swagger and menace, had cornered a young woman and her son, their laughter sharp and cruel as they snatched at her purse. The woman, Sarah, clutched her son, Leo, tight against her legs, shielding him with her body. Samuel watched, his eyes, the color of a faded sky, missing nothing. They weren't the clouded, distant eyes of an old man lost in memory. They were sharp, analytical, assessing angles, momentum, and intent. He saw the leader's cheap bravado, the nervous energy of his two followers, and the cold, predatory gleam in the fourth one's eyes. That was the dangerous one. The leader shoved Sarah. She stumbled back, crying out as her ankle twisted. Leo's small cry pierced the air again. That was the trigger. Something inside Samuel, a switch forged in the ice and fire of a long-forgotten war, finally flipped. He rose from the bench, not with the creaking reluctance of his 86 years, but with a fluid, deliberate economy of motion. His back was straight, his shoulders squared. He looked less like a frail retiree and more like an ancient oak tree finally deciding to move. "That's enough," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise, clear and steady as a ship's bell in a fog. The four men turned, their sneers deepening as they took in the sight of him. An old man, his face a road map of wrinkles, his hands gnarled with arthritis. "What did you say, Pops?" The leader scoffed, taking a step toward him. "You want some of this too? Go back to your bingo game." Samuel didn't answer. He just kept walking forward, his gaze locked on the one he'd identified as the true threat. The man with the cold eyes shifted his weight, his hand sliding toward the pocket of his jacket. A glint of metal. A knife. The fight, if you could call it that, was over in less than 10 seconds. It wasn't a brawl, it was a disassembly. As the leader swung a clumsy fist, Samuel didn't step back. He stepped inside the arc of the punch, his left hand deflecting the blow while his right hand, fingers rigid, jabbed precisely into the man's solar plexus. The air left the man's lungs in a choked gasp, and he folded like a cheap suit. The second one came at him from the side, and Samuel simply used the folding leader's momentum, pivoting and pushing the bigger man into his friend. They tumbled into a heap of flailing limbs. That left the dangerous one, the one with the knife. The blade was out now, a nasty-looking switchblade. He lunged, aiming for Samuel's gut. But Samuel wasn't there. He'd sidestepped with a grace that defied his age, his gnarled hand clamping down on the man's wrist. There was a sharp, dry crack of bone. The knife clattered to the pavement. The man screamed, a high, thin sound of pure agony. The fourth attacker, seeing his three companions neutralized in seconds, froze, his eyes wide with disbelief and sudden terror. Samuel simply looked at him. He didn't speak, didn't threaten. He just held his gaze, and in the depths of those pale blue eyes, the young man saw a history he couldn't possibly comprehend. He saw something ancient and unbreakable. The fourth man turned and fled, disappearing into the trees. Samuel stood there for a moment, breathing evenly, the only sound the whimpering of the three men on the ground. He then bent down, his knees protesting slightly, and picked up the woman's purse. He walked over to Sarah, who was staring, speechless, and handed it to her. "You and the boy should go home now," he said, his voice gentle. "It's getting cold." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Onlookers, who had kept a safe distance, were now emerging, their phones held up to record the aftermath. Sarah was still trying to process what had happened. This quiet, elderly man had moved with the lethal precision of a striking snake. He hadn't fought them. He had dismantled them, piece by piece, with a calm, almost detached expertise that was far more terrifying than any street brawler's rage. The first police car screeched to a halt, and two young officers jumped out, their hands on their holsters. They saw three men on the ground, one clutching a clearly broken wrist, another struggling to breathe, and a third tangled up with his friend. And in the middle of it all stood Samuel, looking like a misplaced grandfather who had wandered into the wrong scene. "Everyone stay where you are," one of the officers shouted, his voice tight with adrenaline. Samuel simply stood his ground, his hands open at his sides. He looked at the officers, then at the young mother and her child, making sure they were truly safe. He had done what was necessary. The rest was just noise. More cars arrived, and with them came the detectives. One of them, a man in his late 30s with a sharp suit and an even sharper air of self-importance, strode onto the scene as if he owned it. His nameplate read Detective Jennings. He scanned the tableau, his eyes lingering on the downed men, then dismissing Sarah and her crying child, before finally settling on Samuel. His brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "What's his deal?" Jennings asked one of the uniformed officers, jerking his chin towards Samuel. "He involved?" The officer shrugged. "The lady says he stopped them, sir. Says he took all 4 of them down." Jennings let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Him? The old-timer? Are you kidding me? Look at him. He probably weighs 120 pounds soaking wet." He walked over to Samuel, his stride radiating an arrogance that set Samuel's teeth on edge. "All right, Grandpa, what's your story? Did you hit them with your cane?" Samuel met his gaze and said nothing. He had seen men like Jennings before. Men who wore their authority like a costume, believing it made them bigger than they were. They were loud, they were confident, and they were often the first to break when things got real. "Are you deaf, old man?" Jennings snapped, his patience already wearing thin. "I'm talking to you. We've got 3 injured men here and witnesses saying you're the one who did it." "That's aggravated assault." Sarah, overhearing this, rushed forward. "No, he saved us. They had a knife. They were robbing me. And he protected us." Jennings waved a dismissive hand at her. "Ma'am, please, let the professionals handle this. We'll get your statement in a minute." He turned his attention back to Samuel, his eyes narrowing. "I need to see some ID, and you're going to have to come down to the station with me. We need to figure out what really happened here." He reached out and grabbed Samuel's arm. The touch was firm, proprietary, and it was a mistake. The moment Jennings' fingers closed around his bicep, the world tilted for Samuel. The scent of cut grass in the park was replaced by the sharp, metallic smell of pine needles and gun oil. The distant city traffic faded into the sound of wind whistling through the skeletal trees of a frozen forest. The detective's grip was the enemy's hand clamping on his shoulder in the dark, the start of a final, desperate struggle for life. He was no longer in a city park in 2023. He was in the Ardennes, 1944. Snow crunched under his boots. The weight of his pack, heavy with explosives and ammunition, was a familiar ache in his back. He could feel the cold seeping through his worn fatigues, a damp, biting chill that went straight to the bone. He and his 3-man team were deep behind enemy lines, their mission to sever a critical communication line before the coming offensive. They were ghosts, members of a unit that didn't officially exist, sent to do the impossible. They called themselves the Phantoms. The ambush had been as silent and sudden as the snowfall. They hadn't seen the patrol, hidden in white camouflage against the drifts. One moment, there was only the sound of their own breathing. The next, the world exploded in muzzle flashes and the vicious tear of machine gun fire. His 2 comrades went down instantly, their lives extinguished before they could even utter a cry. He was alone, dozens of miles from any friendly force, hunted by an enemy patrol. He remembered the desperate flight through the trees, the burn in his lungs, the way he forced himself to stay calm, to think, to use the terrain. He remembered setting the trap, using the last of his explosives to create a diversion while he circled around. And he remembered the final confrontation. Hiding in a snow-laden thicket, he'd waited until the last soldier passed, then emerged from the shadows. The soldier, barely a boy, turned, his eyes wide with shock. He dropped his rifle in his haste to draw his sidearm. Samuel had closed the distance, the fight becoming a primal struggle in the snow. He remembered the German's hand grabbing his arm, just like the detective's. He remembered the cold shock of the boy's knife slicing through his jacket, a fire licking along his ribs. He remembered the grim necessity of what came next, the precise, practiced movements that ended the struggle, the silence that followed, broken only by his own ragged breathing and the gentle fall of snow on the still forest. He had survived, completed his mission alone, and spent 4 days walking back to Allied lines with a knife wound and frostbitten feet. He had survived because he had become something other than a man. He had become a phantom, a creature of the cold and the shadows. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Jennings' voice yanked him back to the present. Samuel blinked, the snowy forest receding, replaced by the concerned faces of the uniformed officers and the angry, reddening face of the detective. He realized he had instinctively, without thought, twisted his arm, applying a subtle pressure to Jennings' wrist that had the detective wincing in pain. Samuel immediately released his grip. "My apologies," he said softly. "You startled me." Jennings pulled his hand back, rubbing his wrist and staring at Samuel with a new, suspicious light in his eyes. There was no way an old man should have a grip like that. "That's it," Jennings said, his authority now mixed with personal insult. "You're coming with me." Now he gestured to one of the officers. "Cuff him." The young officer hesitated, looking from his superior to the calm, elderly man. "Sir? He's the one who helped the victim. I don't care," Jennings snapped. "He assaulted 3 people, and he's resisting. Cuff him." "It's procedure." Samuel didn't resist. He simply held out his hands, his wrists thin and bird-like. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked shut. It felt familiar. He had been a prisoner of war once, for a very short, very violent period of time. As they led him to the patrol car, he glanced back at Sarah and Leo. The little boy was watching, his eyes huge. Samuel gave him a small, reassuring nod. The hero of the hour was being arrested, and the real criminals were being loaded into ambulances. Justice, he mused, was often a matter of perspective. At the station, the process was a demeaning exercise in bureaucratic absurdity. Jennings sat Samuel down in a sterile, windowless interrogation room, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. The detective paced back and forth, firing questions like bullets. "Who are you, really? Where did you learn to fight like that? You ex-military? Some kind of washed-up black belt?" Samuel answered each question with simple, unadorned truth. "My name is Samuel Hayes. I learned to defend myself a long time ago. Yes, I was in the Army." "What unit?" Jennings demanded, leaning over the table. "I don't recall the name," Samuel said. It wasn't a lie. The Phantoms had no official name on any public record. "You don't recall?" Jennings scoffed. "Convenient. Look, old man, you're in a lot of trouble. You can make this easier on yourself by cooperating." Samuel simply sat there, his cuffed hands resting on the metal table, his patience a deep, endless well. He had outlasted men far more threatening than this detective. He had sat in colder rooms, facing worse odds. He could wait. The interrogation went on for hours, a fruitless exercise in which Jennings' frustration grew with every calm, simple answer Samuel provided. Finally, Jennings gave up for the night, placing Samuel in a holding cell. "We'll try this again in the morning," he snarled. "Maybe a night in a cell will jog your memory." Samuel didn't mind the cell. It was quiet. He closed his eyes, and, for the first time in a long time, he didn't see the snows of the Ardennes. He saw the face of the little boy in the park. He had done the right thing. That was all that mattered. The next morning, the precinct was buzzing with an unusual energy. It started when a single black sedan, the kind that whispers of federal importance, pulled up to the curb. Then another, and another. 3 men emerged, each one dressed in the immaculate, crisp uniform of a United States Army general. One was a 2-star, another a 3-star, and the man in the lead, tall and broad-shouldered with a chest full of ribbons and silver hair cut with military precision, wore the 4 stars of a full general. The desk sergeant, a man who had seen it all, nearly swallowed his tongue. He fumbled to his feet as the 3 men entered the precinct, their very presence seeming to suck the air out of the room. Every cop in the vicinity froze, their conversations dying in their throats. "We are here to see a Mr. Samuel Hayes," the 4-star general said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that needed no amplification. "I believe he is in your custody." "My name is General Peterson," the desk sergeant could only stammer. Yes, sir. Right away, sir." He frantically buzzed the detectives division. "Jennings, get out here. Now." Detective Jennings came striding out of his office, a smug look on his face, ready to start his second round with the obstinate old man. The look vanished the second he saw who was standing in the lobby. He stopped dead, his mouth falling slightly open. He had never seen a general in person before, let alone 3 of them, one of whom was a 4-star. The police chief came hurrying out of his office, his face pale. "General Peterson, to what do we owe the honor?" General Peterson's eyes were like chips of granite. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You are holding one of this nation's greatest heroes in a jail cell, Chief. I suggest you rectify that situation immediately." "Where is he?" Jennings, looking utterly bewildered, led the way. The generals followed, their polished boots echoing on the linoleum floor like drumbeats of judgment. They arrived at the interrogation room where Samuel was waiting, a styrofoam cup of cold coffee untouched in front of him. Jennings opened the door. Samuel looked up, his expression unreadable, as the 3 uniformed men filled the doorway. He recognized the insignia, but not the faces. They were all too young. Then the 4-star general stepped forward and came to a rigid position of attention. He executed a salute so sharp, so filled with profound respect, that it seemed to vibrate in the small room. "Mr. Hayes," General Peterson said, his voice thick with emotion. "It is an honor, sir." The other 2 generals followed suit, saluting the old man in the worn tweed jacket. Samuel slowly, a little stiffly, rose to his feet. He gave a slight, acknowledging nod. "It's been a long time, General," he said quietly. Jennings stared, his mind struggling to compute the scene before him. Generals were saluting the crazy old man he'd arrested for assault. The police chief looked like he was about to have a heart attack. General Peterson lowered his salute but remained at attention. He turned his glacial gaze on Jennings. "Detective," he began, his voice dangerously soft. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Jennings shook his head, unable to speak. "This man," Peterson said, his voice rising with controlled power, "is Sergeant Samuel Hayes. He doesn't recall his unit because his unit was officially denied to exist. He was a member of a special operations group so clandestine, their records are still sealed under the National Security Act of 1947. He was a phantom." The general took a step closer to Jennings, who involuntarily shrank back. In the winter of 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, Sergeant Hayes's team was ambushed deep behind enemy lines. He was the sole survivor. Wounded, with no supplies, and hunted by an entire enemy platoon, he not only evaded capture for 4 days in a blizzard, but he also completed his mission. Alone, he destroyed a communications hub that was coordinating the armored spearhead of the German offensive, single-handedly delaying a Panzer Division's advance for 12 critical hours. His actions saved the lives of an entire regiment of the 101st Airborne who were cut off and about to be annihilated. For this, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. In secret, Peterson wasn't finished. His eyes bored into Jennings. That was just one mission. He has 2 Distinguished Service Crosses for Silver Stars and 5 Bronze Stars for Valor. He fought in Korea and did 2 tours in Vietnam, serving in MECVSOG, another unit you've probably never heard of, running cross-border operations that we still can't talk about. This man has bled on 3 continents for this country. He has forgotten more about courage and sacrifice than you will ever know. He is not a grandpa or an old-timer. He is a living legend. And you put him in handcuffs. The silence in the room was absolute. Every word had landed like a hammer blow. Jennings was chalk white, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only a raw, gaping shame. He looked at Samuel, truly looked at him for the first time, and saw not a frail old man, but the shadow of the warrior he had been. He saw the history in his steady eyes, the strength in his quiet posture. The police chief finally found his voice. "General, I am so sorry. We had no idea. Detective Jennings, release him immediately and apologize to Mr. Hayes." Jennings fumbled with the handcuff key, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit it into the lock. The cuffs clicked open. Samuel rubbed his wrists, his expression not of triumph, but of a deep, abiding weariness. Jennings stood before him, his head bowed. "Mr. Hayes." "Sir, there are no words. I am so sorry. I was arrogant and I was wrong. I completely misjudged you, and I am deeply ashamed." He looked up, his eyes pleading. "Is there anything I can do?" Samuel looked at the young detective, and for the first time, he offered a small, sad smile. He saw not an enemy, but a young man who had been taught to see the world through a narrow, cynical lens. A man who valued uniforms and authority over character and quiet dignity. "You're young," Samuel said, his voice kind. "You see a uniform, you see an old man's jacket. You see the surface. You don't see the person inside. The most important battles aren't fought by soldiers, detective. They're fought inside every one of us. The battle between judgment and understanding. Between pride and humility. You just learned a hard lesson in that fight today. Don't waste it." He placed a gentle hand on Jennings' shoulder. "You can do something for me. The next time you see an old man, or anyone you're tempted to dismiss, just stop, take a breath, and try to see the person. That's all." With that, Samuel turned and walked out of the room. The three generals formed up around him, a silent, reverent honor guard, and escorted him out of the precinct, leaving a humbled detective and a stunned police force in their wake. As Samuel stepped out into the bright morning sun, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The ghosts of the Ardennes, for a moment, seemed to recede. He had not sought recognition, and he did not want it now. But he knew that today, at least one young man had learned that heroes don't always wear uniforms or carry weapons. Sometimes they wear worn tweed jackets and sit quietly on park benches, waiting to be needed. The story of what happened at the precinct spread like wildfire, a cautionary tale for every rookie and a moment of reflection for every veteran on the force. Detective Jennings was never the same. He became a quieter, more thoughtful officer, known for his patience and his uncanny ability to connect with people from all walks of life, especially the elderly and forgotten. He learned to see the person, not the label, and in doing so, he became a far better detective and a far better man. The world is full of people like Samuel Hayes. They are the quiet ones, the unassuming figures you pass on the street every day. They don't ask for thanks or recognition. They carry the weight of their history in silence, their heroic deeds packed away like old medals in a dusty box. They are the living monuments to a time of great sacrifice and unwavering duty. We owe them not just our respect, but our attention. We owe it to them, and to ourselves, to look past the wrinkles and the slow steps, and to see the strength and wisdom that lies within. For a nation that forgets its defenders will itself soon be forgotten. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories that honor the hidden heroes among us.